The Professors is brought to you by Blackborder.com, a Magic the Gathering site with the best stories and best pros in the game. You can also pre-order Magic 2011 boxes at $89.99, so go check out Blackborder.com today.
Don't slow down. Don't slow down. Don't slow down. Don't slow down.
Hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of The Professors. In this episode we'll take a look at a final Rise of the Eldrazi draft I plan to win, go through my draft picks, the 3 rounds to follow, and the time investment of drafting online. So let's draw. Rise of the Eldrazi draft has proven to be one of the most skill-intensive draft formats, rivaled only by Triple Ravnica draft, and while this is mostly because you get 3 packs of the same set, and there's the challenge of putting together a real constructed type deck, but even where Ravnica was a lengthy war of attrition that probably consisted of you playing quite a few subpar cards that didn't meet the quality of the format's bombs, Rise of the Eldrazi proves that you need to make your cards fit into a curve and not allow any cards to be subordinated in value by other cards. I'd pick Stagger Shock over a Jiraga Tree Speaker, but only if the removal can prove more useful than the Mana Dork. Most of the time the Stagger Shock's right, but when you're high on the top end with Ulamog's Crushers, Artisan of Kozilek's, and Wildheart Invoker ability triggers, and have no 1-3 drops, and have a higher end removal suite including say 3 Induced Despair and 2 Corpse Hatch in your Jund deck, the Tree Speaker eventually gains more utility than the Stagger Shock. Therefore, this draft format should reward the constructed deck builder, right? Well, yes and no. The format respects the constructed deck builder in the sense that, when the player can choose the card they want in their deck and manipulate the table to give it to them, the builder can engineer the deck out of roughly the commons and uncommons they need. However, even when you're manipulating the table as you want to give you the cards you want, when the cards you're looking for either aren't going around or there was some missignaling to the player passing to you who didn't tell you the open color, that's where the know-how of when to switch is required. Like with any format, getting this know-how comes from watching others draft, and engineer the best decks from the best combinations in the format. The best example of this is LSV on Channel Fireball, who shows you every bit of his drafting, even when he loses in the first round and cheerily says, well, guess there's time for another one. This is the most realistic way to show a draft, but I can't say it's the most descriptive or most efficient. Assuming the drafter gets to play to the 3rd round, you have to watch 100 minutes of material to see if they won the draft or not and all the picks. And sure, you can skip to the end of the round, but even then you have to watch a half hour of material and don't get all the thoughts on the match that the player didn't provide when they were playing. Therefore, I propose that the entire draft be recapped in about a 10-minute time span with all the appropriate pictures and thoughts you just couldn't express in the draft. So let's begin. Personally, I've had an affinity for red-green in this format for the past few weeks. While I still believe blue's the best color, I also believe everyone knows blue's the best color, and that it can support 2 to 4 drafters at the table, so they try to pick it up. However, where I'd previously thought the removal in black had topped the removal in red, or beat down an acceleration in green, I found that there aren't enough Vendettas and Corpse Hatches to go around, and that Gloomhunter and Dreaddrone are subordinated by Kiln Fiend and Emrakul's Hatcher in red, and even Orin Arlid and Stomper Cub in green. So the truth is, black is still a top color, but only if only 2 players at the table pick up the black cards, which isn't often the case. So it's dropped to my 4th best color. White, however, still sucks because no matter how good Gideon is, you can have your infinite McKinney Griffins and Souls Attendants and still only have a slim chance in the finals. This first pack has 5 cards I'd be happy to play in the deck. Stagger Shock is the obvious choice, but Kozilek's Predator and Heat Ray both fit the deck, and I happen to favor playing Kiln Fiend in some instants and sorceries instead of Orin Arlid and some subpar enchantments, that even when equipped to him will be dwarfed by their mid-game creatures. This second pack also has 3 playable cards, but the Leveler simply overshadows an Eldrazi, for which we can pick up a substitute later, and the late game beater with a Spark ability stuck on is notable, but still not as good. I wasn't sure at this point if we'd be going into red-green, and wouldn't until we got the okay from Signals later in this pack. However, I wasn't planning to play Brood Birthing in whatever deck we're building, and didn't find Prophetic Prism particularly necessary. Sure, it fixes your colors, but it also is a slot better filled by Surreal Memoir with 4 or 5 instants ready to be regrown. Pick 4 was pretty simple. While Lagak Lizard can fill the 4-drop void left by a lack of Wildheart Invokers and Kozilek's Predators, Spawning Breath lets you excel to the 5 drops in the same scenario and kill off an unleveled small creature or opposing spawn. At this point, I'm willing to put myself into the red-green deck, which means no Prophetic Prism, as it'd simply cantrip. However, this is the first of the very sexy Stomper Cubs we'd pick up to beat down with. However, having written the last sentence, I'm not exactly sure why I didn't pick the Snake Umber here. A little confused still, I guess, but not really relevant as I doubt it would have seen play. Pick 7 I got to picking up a Lagak Lizard, but the remaining signal said no red and green cards are crappy enough to not have been picked over these remaining white, black, and blue cards. So we're on to pack 2. Ulamog's Crusher is great, but if we're going to play Beatdown, then Traitorous Instinct is a finisher that works 4 turns earlier, and temporarily grants you their biggest threat. However, in the next pick, when the poor man's Cloud Goat Ranger came around, Crusher started looking a lot more playable. Oh well. We'll get another chance at him in a few picks. This next pack had me a little confused. For 3 people over, it would appear that there is no player drafting black with the Vendetta still there, no player drafting red with Stagger Shock still there, and no player drafting white with Puncturing Light and Oust still there. So I was more than happy to pick up my number 2 pick in red under only Kargan Dragonlord, Stagger Shock. I really don't like Akun Boulderfoot, and Wrap in Flames is good for the controller side of the ramp deck, but not when you're the aggro deck with so many 4-drops. Even like Lagak Lizard. Lagak Lizard also gives us more creatures to play a Might of the Masses on, which is our 4th instant, and makes Surreal Memoir borderline playable, by the way. And with Champion's Drake coming this late, it's unlikely that anyone except the guy we're passing to is in Levelers, so Brood Birthing is the only relevant enough pick. Battle Rattle Shaman isn't the greatest, but its effect starts immediately, and as a 4-2 it's playable. And when you can make Stomper Cubs into 7-3 Tramplers, your 5-mana creature trading for their 4-mana creature and 3 to 4 damage is still worth it. Later in this pack we picked up an Akun Boulderfoot, which is just what we needed for the higher end of our curve, that is, until the higher end of our curve became the pack 3 pick 1 Palaka Worm. The next pick I still stand by. While I would get blown out by Gelatinous Genesis, and for anything below 8 mana the card's not flexible enough. Next pick, we get a Kiln Fiend, which is happy to come and play alongside 7 instants and sorceries making it in already, probably including Surreal Memoir. This next pick looks like a mistake, right? I mean, Flame Slash removes nearly half the field. However, Wildheart Invoker is the 4-drop that also supplies the high drop effect you always need. And there's the higher end of our curve forming nicely. Rapacious One generates lots of spawn, sure, but as a 5-4 Trampler for 6, it's still plenty playable. The fact that it provides mana acceleration and blockers for later is just extra. Ogre's Cleaver in the next pack is playable enough with all our creatures, so it's the easy pick. Even over Lagak Lizard. What? Is that really a Beastbreaker that late? Is that really a 7th pick Beastbreaker? I guess it is. Well, the next 8 picks were pretty irrelevant, and nothing could really upset this balance of creatures, removal, low drops, and high drops. This is the final build I ended up with. In round 1, I kept a land-flooded hand. However, being that plays of the games in this format often start on turn 3 or 4 with a lack of attacking creatures until turn 5 or 6, I was willing to keep this. The first 3 turns were simply the playing of a Prophetic Prism versus an Ogre's Cleaver. But I got a 4th turn play in the form of Kozilek's Predator, followed up by an Embercool's Hatcher, a Kiln Fiend, and attacks for 4 versus only a Soul Surge Elemental. Unfortunately, the Consume the Meek was there to take out 6 of my creatures. Fortunately, a Kozilek's Predator and Embercool's Hatcher pushed him to 5, until a Valakut Firebore came to the opposing side. However, with a Palaka Worm coming down next turn, we were on to game 2. On the draw once again, believe it or not, I was willing to keep this hand in a format where my curve essentially begins with Kozilek's Predator. My opponent had a Goblin Arsonist to contradict that statement and bring me down to 17, but a Predator, Hatcher, Wildheart Invoker, and Lagak came down, ending off the game with Wildheart Invoker's ability and with enough spawn to block the Firebore while I went on attacking. In round 2, I mulled a 1-land hand for this 6-card hand. Now, maybe I'm just bad at drawing good hands of Magic cards, or maybe I make bad mulligan decisions with all these lands to spell imbalances, but I wasn't really willing to mull to 5 when I just needed a land to get into the game. Unfortunately, my opponent had 2 early drops on the first 3 turns and hit me for 3. At first, I wasn't really sure if he was the red-green beatdown deck or the blue-white levelers deck. Turns out, he was in both. Fortunately, my Stagger Shock took care of his Goblin, and its Rebound took care of a newly cast Venerated Teacher. Later in the game, after we had swapped half a dozen creatures, a Stagger Shock took care of a second Venerated Teacher and Siege Runner. Later, I landed a Beastbreaker and Stomper Cup, but at this point he made use of the Gelatinous Genesis for 6, and took the game with a Student of Warfare, which was pumped and made Champion's Drake into a 4-4. Even with a Palaka Worm, his 3-3 oozes were too much with me at 10. In Game 2, I got a good hand for the first time in the draft, and despite a Student of Warfare coming down, I was able to counter it on the field with a Beastbreaker and Lagak Lizard. And while he kept his Student on the field for the rest of the game, he was unable to bring out anything else more substantial than a Lone Missionary, Venerated Teacher, and Rune Servitor, while I brought down an Embercool's Hatcher, Stomper Cub, Palaka Worm, and Wildheart Invoker. I then took a Student with Traitorous Instinct and hit for 19 all in one turn. Game 3 went much the same way, with my steady stream of guys beating down for the win. In round 3 I was willing to keep this hand. However, the Esper colored leveler deck with this late game setup and a Drake Umbra and Domestication landing, with me having used 2 Stagger Shocks and the rebounds to kill 2 3/3 Zulaport Enforcers prior that would have otherwise killed me, I couldn't take down the Halimar Wave Watch that was a 6/6 at this point and receiving the Umbra. In game 2, I used the Kiln Fiend and Stagger Shock to get in 10 damage, and kill off a Zulaport Enforcer until the Fiend met a Vendetta. I then brought down a Lizard and Red Invoker, which unfortunately met a Null Champion and Ikora Outrider, but with Stomper Cub taking down 2 of his big creatures after it was equipped with an Ogre's Cleaver, and Palakaworm coming down the turn afterwards, we were on to game 3. Game 3 went pretty quick. I got a subpar hand with 2 mountains, but was on the draw, so drawing into enough forests allowed me to play out an Emrakul's Hatcher and Kozilek's Predator. However, with an Escape Null and 2 Drake Umbers, I couldn't race him. Oh well, so close, better luck with Magic 2011. Let me know your thoughts, what you thought of this draft and this episode, and until another episode this weekend, this is Anthony Palmario, on behalf of the Professors. We're tapped out for now, but we'll untap soon.